Good morning.
This is WZRD Chicago, 88.3 FM. And we have with us at WZRD Andrea Paxton via Zoom. Andrea is co-founder of Illinois Black Wall Street and also co-founder of the Harvey area Chamber of
Chamber of
Commerce.
Commerce.
Yes. How are you today,
I'm
Andrea?
wonderful. How are you?
Awesome, awesome. I love the your map of the different Illinois Black Wall Street districts and behind you.
Thank you.
Andrea, we learned a lot about you, and then also we know that recently you have been advocating for the passage of House Bill in the Illinois General Assembly for House Bill 1260. We read the entire bill on the air before this interview, like about 10 minutes ago.
Okay.
So
No, that is 1960, 1960.
1960. Okay, 1960. Sorry about that. Good. Thanks for clarifying.
Okay.
It's typos. Okay. And then, well, first of all, we learned that you studied urban planning. And then, why did it become important for you to apply your education in urban planning to fighting for Black Wall Street and co-founding Illinois Black Wall Street?
Well, my career has been guided based on just my background in general as African American young woman born and raised in the South of America, meaning Louisiana and Mississippi. I was born in Mississippi and raised in Louisiana and Mississippi. And the well, and I come from a family of activism. My mother, my grandmother, my uncles, my father, um, they all were people that were community active in the community and activists. My mother was a minister in Southern Illinois, actually Springfield. So my career, no matter what I did, was going to have something to do with empowerment and reform for the African American slash Black community,
Mhm.
or 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 social justice in general, if you would. Because injustice is injustice no matter what culture. I happen to come from uh, a, 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 a heritage of a culture that is most impacted in America.
Mhm. How were your parents social activists, and how did they influence you? What were they active about?
Okay, so the integration of North Natchez and South Natchez School happened when I was a little girl. And this was the integration of the Black students into um, mainstream Caucasian schools as well as vice versa. And it was very little students coming from Caucasian neighborhoods into Black neighborhoods. And in the South, there are subdivisions, and those subdivisions aren't. It's much different than the layout of Chicago and the South suburbs, and much more of what the layout was back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s before the integration of housing. The difference is when you're living in rural land development, um, you what they call in the South go to town, if you would. So then we would travel like 30 miles into town to grocery shop and things like that because there were not local markets. But because I come from a family of farmers and Black ranchers, um, my family was self-sufficient in the sense that they grew their food. My aunts sewed, my mother, and it just was a community of people and we lived along the Natchez Trace. So my family's origin on my matriarch side of the family is the Natchez Trace. Matter of fact, right directly behind Alcorn State College. So there's a difference in when you're born, when you're raised in that type of culture in a community where it's so divided and so excluded until those communities have to act on their own to become an ecosystem, to become an economic growth factor. So my great uncle, Osceola Wilson. He actually was part of bringing the Black Farmers Union into Natchez, Mississippi. So I come from a heritage of people. My grandfather volunteered to fight in World War I and II. He volunteered, and so did my uncle. So on both sides of my family, I come from four generations of military, and these were the people who basically started our journey here in the United States. Well, my mother's side of the family is indigenous Black Indian. So the needless to say, knowing the Indian culture, knowing firsthand about the Trail of Tears, being raised knowing all of these things, having a Haitian father, knowing that my family's being taught growing up that we're and shown the places on the lower Mississippi River where the slave boats came in, and being shown where my dad's family came into Mississippi. So having both sides, having the native side, and that were not enslaved, but again enslaved based on economic stature and the ability to grow as a nation of people or indigenous nation of people, and then having the impact of the of forced immigration, if you would, on the other side. So I got to see both sides of it and learn both sides of it, but without being being an activist, but not prejudiced, if you would. There's a difference. There's a difference in racism. Well, I would say not being racist, but prejudice against a system that disadvantages people on purpose, specifically, Black people, and Native people. So, when you're raised with that environment, but knowing that there are good people in all races, and being introduced and interacting as a professional with people who are into activism. And there's bad and good. I just want to put those things out there. There's bad and good in all races. There's, well, I would say good and evil in all races. And we have to understand that. There's the implosion of issues, and then there's the outplosion of issues, if you would, if that makes sense. Does that make sense to you?
What I kind of am understanding is that you were actually living the history, and as you were part of you watched your earlier generations and your parents' generation, and then your generation. You were actually living the history. It's different from the racism that let's say the Black people in Chicago are experiencing, because you're in the area where you see the generations of the history, and I'm assuming also when you went to school and studied history, was the history that you experienced even taught in the schools? I doubt it, and I think that when you're talking about implosion and explosion, is that that entrenchment that you have in history that you understand, and as the way things are.
Exactly. So yes, you're so correct. It's different when you were actually raised as a part of the movement, and you've seen things that, and I'm not taking, Chicago has, there's the tragedy for African American Black folk have been, it's all over America, all over Chicago. I mean, all over Illinois and all over America. However, it happens different and it impacts you different based on where you grew up and how you grew up. And like you said, I've historically been a part of the growth. I'm 54 years old. And, the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King was I want to say 60. He was killed. He was killed a year. I was 1 year old. I was a year old when he was assassinated. So, but the civil rights movement started prior to that. And so my parents being part of that, it didn't stop, it slowed it down. However, there were people struggling prior to Martin Luther King. There were churches being burned down prior to Martin Luther King. And while those pillars, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and a number of the major pillars in the community or leaders of our community, they were the ones that stood up and stood out and were supported for those factors. And so when you watch that, and I'll move into what you call the implosion. When you watch that, when you come from a people that a narrative like that has been written, and then the leaders that were guiding the communities in the right direction were basically assassinated due to the factors that they were upholding justice. Martin Luther King didn't just stand up for justice for Black people. He stood up for just injustice as it pertains to any people. However, he understood that that injustice was predominantly and that it was encroached on us. And the other difference is that our immigration was forced. Everybody else made a choice to come to America. The Black history in America was forced. And the ones that it was forced upon, and there's major impact from birth even. So I want to say that, and I'm pretty sure this segment is not long enough for a major history lesson, but a lot of what other nationalities and races don't understand is that the factors behind being Black / African American, however you want to politically state that, it's a whole different type of trauma. It's a whole different type of and then the implosion portion is that each African American unit of people or sector of people in America, based on where they live, have a different experience. They have a different historical experience. The people who were in housing immigration and that in the 60s have a different experience than someone like myself who lived in a rural protected community. I learned about the violence. I did not firsthand experience it because we were protected. We lived secluded. We lived on farms. We lived in an area where, like I said, we traveled. We got in the car and traveled as a family, 2 families, 3 families at a time. Doesn't mean that you don't know anything about it, because when you have to travel in groups to go to shop for groceries and food, well, not food, but to shop for resources and supplies, and in some sense, clothing or material to make clothing, that kind of thing. It was a trip, a trip from a 30-minute trip just to go and get those supplies, go to town, as they say. So then you bring that, you translate that over into what's happening today, and my background versus someone else's background who grew up in Chicago, which is a transient system, a public transportation system where there are buses and different things where they were discriminated against with transportation. Even when they're in the inner city process, I mean, the suburbs were in the 60s and 70s, well, early 60s and 70s, before the 60s, 65, 64, 65, with housing integration. most African American people were in quadrants in inner cities that were overpopulated. So then you rush those people into suburban areas, and the whole counter component that comes with them not having access to a transportation or being discriminated on transportation, you have a whole nother impact there. You get what I'm saying? So if we want to get into all the dynamics, it would be a history lesson. But the basic component is that there are inequities. There have always been inequities. Inequities have never been balanced. And um, my coming to Chicago was based on schooling. And it actually I started in Springfield. I actually graduated from high school in Springfield. My father passed away when I was a teenager, and I moved to Springfield permanently with my mother and my grandmother. Um, Majority of my family still live in the South, and would go there just redirected roles. But still very connected with the South, very connected in planning in the South, very connected in all of that. However, I did not go to a HBCU because I had been taught Black history all my life. And it goes back to that history component that you're speaking on. Black history was part of our educational factors in the South. You had Black history and American history in school. When I moved to Springfield, Illinois, and started school at 14 years old, I remember going to Franklin Junior High for about 6 months, and then starting Southeast Springfield Southeast High School. There were, and the Blacks were the minority. It was probably about 100 to 200 Black children to maybe 1,000 Caucasian children. If you look at, I could post my graduation class. And I've never really thought about the numbers, but maybe I should look, because I want to say around about it, and I don't want to misquote. And I do understand these things go to these, they're seen by everybody. So I don't want to misquote, but what I will say is that we were in probably the lowest percentile in representation in the school. And there was American history. It was no Black history. Black history is something you took in college here. But in the South, it was taught from kindergarten all the way up. You always had Black history.
Oh, what do you mean always have Black history? You mean always did not have Black history? Or was it like what
No,
did you
no,
mean?
no. In the South, in Southern states, Black history is a class.
Oh,
Black history and American history are taught in school from kindergarten through 12th grade. And then you take, you know, if you want to take electives, or you want to have a history major, a Black history, well, it was a long time before there was even a Black history major. But you could take, and even in college, certain colleges, so people went to SBCUs, HBCUs, because the historically Black colleges, again, part of the educational curriculum was taking a Black history class and then American history. Mainstream schools and mainstream colleges didn't start until later.
well, what about the history the Black history that you learned in school? How accurate was it with the history that you learned from your parents and the history that you experienced?
The Black history in school was very real, because again, because again, the Black history in Southern states were different than Black history in Northern states. Matter of fact, like I said, Black history was only taught in schools in Northern states during Black History Month. Okay. Whereas in the South, in Southern schools, Black history was part of American. You had Black history class and you had an American history class. And it was something that went through all the way through school. it, from kindergarten, kids were not, and because the schools were segregated at one time, you're integrating the total American history component into Black history, as opposed to being in a school where you're only taught American history. And then now you have the tearing downs of all these monuments that did not represent the positive history in America. Does that make sense? If every school in America was teaching Black history and American history, there wouldn't have been this great tearing down of all of these monuments that people raised to be so great in America, and these statues. Okay, so then in the South, like I said, Black schools taught Black history, and when you look at the history in mainstream school, a lot of it was watered down. There was not, I mean, a lot of the facts are being brought out today about the real Black history, or about the extreme amount of trauma that was placed upon Black races, and so there's quite a difference. And then you have, when I say the implosion, you have people who are in the northern states or whatever who were not, they wanted to forget about it. Most people who migrated north, the tragedies in the South, the rural living, they traveled to the South to because Juneteenth, as you brought up in the Juneteenth, is the factor that because the South is so rural, you have this big gap where people were even known, the people didn't even know that slavery had been abolished. You get what I'm saying? So then we're talking like a time warp. We're talking like a major time warp where, there's this lapse of people even knowing that they were free from slavery. So then once a lot of them figured it out and they knew, they migrated north. They not migrated north, and they wanted to leave that behind them. And I'll say, and bringing that into my generation, when I first started as an urban planner, it was not popular for urban planning to a planner to be a woman, number one, let alone an African American woman. Planning has always been male dominated. And in the state of Illinois, if you look back at the Illinois history, up until the last 10, 15 years, there's never even been women in planning. Very few, very few, and predominantly Caucasian male, because you're looking at, and then we're going into there being a political system behind it being municipal planning. I started as a planner as in the private industry, and started in the public industry because I saw how the private industry impacted the public industry. So, and not to take it, I'm just taking it into the next, I'm looking at your questions, I guess, before you ask them. So was I clear on what I just addressed for you?
Yes, absolutely. And let's welcome Bill Morton, President of the Rogers Park Chamber of Commerce, and a fellow community activist like you, Andrea. You are a co-founder of the Harvey Area Chamber of Commerce, and you're very active in community advocacy as well. Welcome, Bill.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I was listening to the interview before I popped on here. And I do have some questions for you. I mean, being, chamber co-founders and everything, I know we have a lot in common. But I want to ask you about equity, because we talk about Lawndale, and we're talking about food deserts. Mm-hmm. We're talking about people who don't have the resources needed in certain communities rather than other communities. And you also mentioned about Black history and American history being taught in schools. When I went to school in Elmwood Park, there was no Black history. So if you're talking about the Greenwood community and the Black Wall Street massacre, I don't call it a riot, I call it a massacre.
It was.
And I didn't learn about any of this. I knew nothing about diversity, equity, about Black Wall Street until I moved to Rogers Park, until I applied education for myself, until I started getting out and talking to people. And I think that may be part of the issue where people who look like me don't get the education about this. They don't get the understanding about everything that happened. So I was just wondering, for the equity that we're seeing now, even though it's not where it needs to be, it's better than it was. How do you think that the massacre actually made a positive change towards human rights?
Okay. Well,
Like the effect
no
of it.
massacre
Yeah.
makes did you misstate something? No massacre makes
No,
a
no,
positive.
no. What I meant is learning about
Okay.
it, knowing
Okay.
about it, being educated about the injustices,
Okay.
and being educated about the injustices helps us to make a more positive and better world. And so I don't believe, with what we know about Black Wall Street, without that horrible, tragic history, would we be would we be would we learn about all this, all the good things, if we didn't have such a monumentous tragedy? They say that about the school shootings as well. That causes gun reform, maybe, hopefully. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. Well,
And we
give you a
learn.
history. Give you a history on Black Wall Street itself is the very things that I just focused on. It has not been something that I didn't know about, or a number of Black people for that matter. Matter of fact, for 100 years, we're looking at in Tulsa, Oklahoma, you're looking at the descendants of some of those people who were massacred, who have walked around for a century and decades with this heavy on their hearts. We got to meet some of the survivors. I'm so thankful in 2015 when we actually connected and started working with Black Wall Street Tulsa. That was our first educational pilgrimage. And I have to mention my co-founder, Jeff Dawkins, who actually he was a for-profit and he had South Suburban Black Wall Street. And after he brought me in talking about, and this was basically talking about college tours, HBCU tours, and giving the history back to younger people. He started with that focal on giving that information to kids in school that had no clue. And there's a different appreciation when you do have a clue. But for people like myself, I mean, Jeff was saying that he had to learn about it, and he's Black. Jeff is Black, and so do many other. Because again, the trauma based on where what region of the United States or areas that Black people came from, it depicts what their attitude is towards these things. However, Black Wall Street happened they were destroyed. You have to understand. And this is something that is difficult for a lot of people of color, Black people of color, is that we're studied. We're studied. Our communities are studied. We're studied. There is no way that you could perform the systemic the systemic impact on a race of people like there's been on Black people without studying them. And there's a history of the study to impact and to make servitude and systemic issues as it pertains to the Black race in America in general. Again, we came here through human trafficking. And see, people don't like to hear all of these things intertwined and talked about. and even some Black people don't like to hear it because it's like it's too traumatic. But if we want to talk about human trafficking and we want to end human trafficking, you have to start with a seed, or you have to start where things started. You want to talk about inequities today, you have to go back to where inequities first started. And just like we're systemically suppressed, then we have people who, like yourself, you're a descendant, and things transcend over time. Okay, it doesn't make it right because you weren't taught. It doesn't make it wrong, and we should not look at you in a negative manner because of that. You get what I'm saying? Because you weren't taught, you're willing to learn. There are some, people of other cultures, they're not willing to learn because they like it the way it is. It's beneficial to them the way it is. And so, and it was set up to be beneficial. I mean, when you hear about the Make America Great Again, America was as great as when it had human capital. You know what that human capital was?
The slavery. It was slavery.
Exactly. The cotton, during the cotton explosion, that's what it was. Human capital is what made America great. So when you hear these things and you come from where I come from, and you've been taught this, and and you grew up in the cotton capital, one of the largest cotton capitals of the United States. You get what I'm saying? Yes. You understand and you see things differently than other people see them. Also, let me stay on Black Wall Street. So Black Wall Street, it happened all over during Red Summer. Back down, the biggest impact on Black culture and communities when after slavery was abolished was that Black people were not allowed into the mainstream economic systems. So they had to create their own economic systems. And then they still were not taught to, they still were not allowed to trade equally, vote equally. Everything in America that Black people have gotten, nothing was ever like said, okay, well, slavery was abolished. Okay, so then now this race of people has equal rights to us. Now, Indians were a bit different because they got their own reservations, but even there they were pushed off. Okay, so then, but still, they kept their culture. They stayed on their reservation, the majority of them, and that's what my planning is. My focal is on rural and urban communities and reservations. So that's where my planning focal is, and it's based on what I come from. Like I said, my family, my mother's side of the family is Native Black American Indian, off of the Natchez Trace. So, and that's where we lived. That's where I grew up, along the Natchez Trace. So my understanding, and even another Black person's understanding of racism may be completely different. You get what I'm saying? So then with the Black Wall Street, we're looking at that tragedy. Tulsa was destroyed because Tulsa kept funding. When you know the real history of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and that was basically what we call today a pilot program, if you would. Tulsa, Oklahoma was basically like sending people into the desert, telling them to dig for water. Okay, but they did it. They created it. They did it. And you have that pilot that was implemented and being funded by those people, by that base of Black people in Tulsa who had basically formed their own banking systems, formed their own everything down to irrigation. You have this aggregate of people, Black people who moved together, of some educated, some not educated, but them all working together to create one economic system that worked for a whole. That's the whole history behind Black Wall Street. And that pilot was emulated all over America. And then there was an attack on every Black community in the United States of America, even before Red Summer. But Red Summer was the rioting point that destroyed the predominant of them. The funding kept coming from Tulsa, and yeah, there was the problem with there has to be something greater than a young man bumping into a young girl in a elevator. Let's say that's the match that was struck that started the fire, if you would. But the whole seeding behind how that would be destroyed was already there. Does that make sense?
It
Or
does.
you do understand that there was an airstrike on Tulsa.
They use airplanes, and it was the first or only bombing of Americans on American soil by Americans.
Exactly.
Right?
So then that call had to be by some form of legislation or high military call, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so then you understand that it would have just been the same race riot as in other communities, where there were people killed on both sides, but it would have been a tragedy, but not as tragic. That was a total leveling of a whole entire community, and it was to make a statement. Okay, what did Pruden just do?
Level the Ukraine, and then
And
to
so, yeah, okay, yeah. So I apologize, my dogs are. Anyway, I thought that. Anyway, needless to say, things are done like this to make make a statement, to say every time you step up, we're going to do something to break down a layer of what you do. And that's been perpetuated, and it's been systemic from one extreme to the other over the last 600 years. You get what I'm saying? So Black Wall Street, I know you want to come in. Black Wall Street was basically the core, the pilot of the economic system, and basically the answer. It's the answer to the systemic servitude. It's the answer to the inequities. It's not a lack of Black people not having the ability to do and be. We all know that there are some of us that are highly educated with degrees and sit in positions, and we know that there are some of us that there's been more trauma than others. That's a quote unquote the implosion portion. We can fix that or deal with that as a race. However, the impact of the actual writing on the wall that this is what we do to keep them segregated, this is what we do to cause the problems, and then we have the minority participation law, which breaks down the community even more, because again, you have people from other minorities that are able to come into Black communities and get loans and grants that the Black people in the community can't get. I told you I was going to be honest and forthright. And when I was looking at Trudy's questions about stepping on toes, I have Asian business counterparts. I have Jewish business counterparts. I've worked with people as a planner of all different nationalities. And the one core component is that they've all been taught racism on a level that in a sense, it's just a system, it's a way. And they don't get it. Okay. So
it's a way of life that they don't acknowledge.
Excuse me?
It's a way of life or a lifestyle that they don't acknowledge. It's something that programmed in them.
Exactly. And so people like myself that haven't been programmed, people like myself that know how, I've been an entrepreneur since I was 26. I have not punched the clock. I've contracted and subcontracted with private companies to do what I do. But then I even saw that being used, because when you're the African American or Black face that goes to your community to talk about all these great jobs and all of this development that's coming through, and then when that development comes through, you have political powers that have made deals that the very people that you talk to are being more disadvantaged, or they're being the face of the actual project, and things are being told to them that doesn't happen. So then that causes another rift among Black people. You get what I'm saying? Because
So
I'm the
what you're
person
saying
or
is
the planner.
the monies are going to like the Black face, and they're going out of the community, or they're going to other races, people working, and the money is going out. It's
Exactly.
not
All the money, every underwater, economically underwater Black community in Illinois and in other states in the United States, they have food deserts, they have no resources, and the communities around those very communities are flourishing. You know why? Because money is coming to the region, but it's not coming to those communities for a number of reasons. And I've done a number of essays about it. And I know this segment is not that long, so I'm gonna give it back to Trudy, but it's good conversation. I appreciate conversation with people who are not driven on a certain, to go in a certain direction and to point out negatives as opposed to positives. So
I do have to ask, I do have to follow up with that. When you said certain people that are pulling things this way or that, I think you're talking about elected officials as well.
exactly. I mean, well, those are the hands that are writing and publishing and pushing the protocol for policy and the procurement of that policy. And we'll go into 1320 and 1960. Trudy, I just didn't want to I don't want to come in and just like, but you asked me a question. I'm going to give you the answer, and it may not be the answer that's expected or wanted, but it will be the truth.
When you talked about how the money, let's say we're talking about HB 1960. The reason that it hasn't been passed is because if it were, do you feel that if it were passed, then the money were to go to Black Wall Street, then it just wouldn't fit with what the establishment wants, and is that what is preventing it from being passed? And what are you doing to help get it passed? What allies do you have that could help get it passed?
Okay, so us starting the organization in 2015, 2016, I actually, as a urban planner with a background in research and certified commercial investments on the private end, where private industries buy up corridors, blocks, and they move that along with the transit-oriented development lines, and that where they're going to make good profit by packaging with government, by packaging, or with local or state bonding mechanisms, or public-private dollars, if you would, for that development project. Okay, so then my dogs are throwing me off. Can you guys hear them?
Yes.
I apologize. I am like on the other end on a different floor, and I have some, they're some work is going on outside, and they're a little upset. But in any event, they're not overflowing my conversation here, are they?
No.
Okay.
Okay. Dogs are adding flavor.
Okay. So when it comes to that, and you're talking about stepping on toes and different things like that, with the House Resolution 1320, which State Representative LaShawn Ford actually had, he actually had it signed by the House. By Mike Mannigan, at the time, and the Speaker of the House, Mike Madigan, at the time. And we were actually negotiating becoming sister cities with Tulsa. However, that's something that had to go through the House and then go through the state. So the shortcut was to do 1320, which focused on, that's from an essay of mine about the state of Illinois and in the inequities in the Black communities and how the race riots held a great the impact on Black communities in the state of Illinois. And so in that, that's what this map is behind. Nobody knows which ones, because I didn't put the formula out there, because I understand, just like with the House resolution, how it was made into a House bill, okay? However, legally, knowing what I know about politics, and I've seen several bills. I mean, the housing discriminatory, as well as the housing, as well as the mortgage predatory lending. Those were bills that were handed with great prefaces. However, when it came down to the actually procurement of those bills and how it redlined all of the Black communities that were in the city of Chicago mainly, that where there was development going to go on. Okay, so the only people during that House bill was at 1520 that were able to purchase property and do it directly were investors, because if I went to purchase at that time, I had to go through a whole class. By the time I went through that class, got my certification, either I would be in foreclosure and completely foreclosed, or I would be or I would have not been able to get that property because someone else with the money or that was investor had already purchased it or already bids in or had done what they needed to do in the background of that. So that's how a lot of people along the lakefront, South Shore, and along South Shore lost their properties. Okay, so then, but the preface of predatory lending targeted underprivileged Black communities. But the procurement in that bill was not what should have been to help those communities. And the only way that they actually corrected that bill was the red line of state. Okay, which didn't really do us any good as a state being redlined, but it made it worse for the Black communities that were already under economic water. So let's go into so let's go into that 1320. The 1320 was written for the purpose of regenerating and identifying Black Wall Street districts that already existed and were burned down historically in the state of Illinois in Black communities, number one. Secondly, to rebuild Black Wall Street or rebuild Black business districts, because they've been ghost towns since 2010, whole blocks of nothing but commercial. And then you have, again, the minority inclusion component, where you have other races. And do you understand where this is going? Do you see where this breeds other areas of systemic racism between minorities and servitude between minorities? Because you have one minority being able to move in, specifically Asians, specifically Arabs, specifically Indians, into Black communities and get a grocery store or what's considered a convenience store, but it's actually a liquor store, okay? And what's considered to the hair industry, the cosmetology industry, when it comes down to the nail salons, so do you see where that's still impacting the community? Whereas all the nail salons in the community, all the nail supply houses in the Black community that was Black owned and Black operated, and a major source of income for people who become certified and not college graduates, which everybody shouldn't have to be a college graduate to survive. So all those small businesses were shut down. Okay, so then you have a wedge between the other minorities and the Black minority, or the Blacks who are considered minorities in their own community. So there's a lack of Black businesses, there's a lack of Black establishment, Black, just the focal of having, when you go to Chinatown, and no disrespect to you, Trudy, when you go to Chinatown, how many African American business or Black businesses do you see in Chinatown?
None.
Exactly. And none are ever gonna probably be there. Why? Because that culture, the Asian culture supports the Asian culture. However, when you bring people in, and this is from study, this is not something I conjured up overnight. When you bring people from Guam, when you bring people who have been under servitude themselves in their other countries, in their native countries, you bring them to America, okay? And we're even the Hispanics now. There's a bumping of heads in the trades with Hispanic people who are in the trades versus Black people. So do you understand how all of this, and it's like, here are the Black people on an island here fighting for what they've always fought for. Now you have to fight against other minorities who have chose to come to America and be in America. And the ones who've been here struggling in the community, paying the high taxes, getting their property taken from them, trying to save their homes and their family buildings during this whole process. And you watch someone come from another community. I'm not saying this is right, but I'm giving you a perspective of what people think based on working in our communities, in Black communities, and what has taken place, okay? You have people who can't. Now, there have been a number of things stacked against them on the other side when it comes down to illegally being incarcerated, and a whole bunch of other things with criminal records. Everybody with a criminal record doesn't mean that they committed over one incident as a teenager. 19 years old, just crossing that breach as a Black man, and you have a felony that's not expunged or erased on your record, you cannot get housing. Or Black man or Black woman, you cannot get housing. You do not qualify for state loans or federal loans like other minorities. So
are you saying that, let's say that there are offenders that are of another race? Are those offenders of another race able to more easily get a job or get housing as long as they are not Black?
You want me to tell you, if you want
Yes.
the truth? Yes, because you know what happens is coming to this country, Social Security numbers, you didn't have one when you were born. It's more difficult to change or to get a different Social Security number when you're born in the United States than when you're coming from another country. So most people who come from other countries have two forms of two Social Security numbers, if you would.
How so?
The tax ID
so?
number.
Tax ID number? Well, tax ID number and a Social Security number is different. But you're coming to because again, I go back to, I've talked to many nationalities, specifically the ones in the Black community, and we have talked, broke bread together, and there's a realism behind the racism. There's the implosion in the community. There's a realism, and if these things aren't addressed, you can forget about this equity inclusion. It makes no sense if you're not dealing with what's causing the inclusions, the exclusions. okay? And I'm focused on what's causing the exclusions. And when you talk about other races, they do have more opportunity than the Black race that's been here and that has had the most impact, and that the real, I mean, you know, that has had the real tragedy in this country, and that's been a planned tragedy. It's not something that just happened. These are things that were planned. Okay, so and this is not from a conspiracy theory or any of this. All of the things that you see coming out today are things that have been in place, and people like me have been taught about. Why? Because you're in a different area of the world, that people are dealing with what's actually going on besides what went on, and dealing with it on a structural and a systemic servitude from that standpoint. Okay, so moving along with Black Wall Street, because I want to finish with Black Wall Street. Black Wall Street is basically focused on putting dollars back into the grassroots businesses in the Black community, rebuilding those business districts and making those business districts part of the rising, if you would, or reform of Black communities. With the Black Wall Street focal that was originally put into place in 1320, the portion of that packaging includes the basis of resources of what's needed in a community to basically start economic growth. One is the food desert component, and being able to shop and have provisions in your own community to recirculate money. Black communities, everything in Black communities goes to the community next door or a mile away. Okay, all of the money is rerouted out of the community. Most of the people who have businesses in the Black community, they do not live in the Black community. They live in other communities. So then not only are the commercial taxes leaving the community, the residential taxes are leaving the community too. So you break
So what you're saying is that the residents who live in Black communities, they go shop in the communities next to them. So those dollars also leave the community.
Well, they don't have a choice. If you don't have food, if you don't have restaurants, food, and clothing stores in the community where you live, you have to have proficient clothing to wear. You
So
have to eat.
so what you're
So,
saying,
yeah.
also is, for instance, the aldermen are the people who approve of whether an establishment can be or not be in a community, such as a business. So what you're saying is that the aldermen of the Black communities are not approving the businesses that are needed, such as grocery stores, etc., in their own communities, and they're allowing those businesses to be established in the white communities or the non-Black communities, so that the Black community residents have to go outside the Black community to get what they need, specifically food.
No. What I am saying is that there's a lack of information that's given to, and like I said, this comes from me walking the independent ladder of being a planner. Okay, so when I was doing the planning structure for the private industry, okay, it was not political on my part. I write the plan, I package it based on the history of the community, based on what the corridor development, minority minority inclusion, because it's the Black community. And when you see private investors saying, oh, well, write that in, but we're going to take that out during the second quarter of this, then there needs to be, on a legislative level, which is the alderman, they have to know that there has to be a local inclusion ordinance, so that any developer that comes to the community that they have to employ, subcontract the Black community. Now, when it comes down to as far as the grocery stores, there are not many African American or Black business owners who have the economic base as an entity to take on, or hasn't been, I'll put it like that. In my history of being a planner, they haven't had the base to take on that. It's usually been a partnership with another nationality to even get started. And then that partnership even started out uneven because the African American or Black owner only had a portion of what they should have had as ownership to just qualify for those dollars. And if you look back in the news, there was a gentleman, 2 or 3 gentlemen that were Black that had construction companies doing development 5-10 years ago. Well, not even 5 years ago in some cases, but they got federal time for using their Black companies, that basically having their Black company's name as a shell, and the company being operated by Caucasian developers. So
there
there's
are opportunities for female women business owners and minority business owners, and they took advantage of that, and the money
exactly.
wasn't going in.
Even with the female, the minority female, so then it had to become disadvantaged minority female. Why? Because you have all the other entities that are involved minority wise, that put their wives in front of their companies. Wife didn't know anything, sits at home every day, whichever, just to make it a minority, just to qualify for minority contracting. However, again, being an activists got together and talked about that and had it investigated. So now there's a whole nother sector, but does it still keeps the African American Black community underwater? Why? Because now we're competing with other with immigrants that have actually come into the community and understand this whole system, and they get funded, and it's no reflection on them because they have to live too. But again, it's still an impact on the Black community, and it's something that needs to be addressed. And when you talk about those aldermen, we do have a lot of people of different cultures and that are in seats and that are holding political seats that don't have the acumen to be there. So they're making deals instead of making decisions about what the core components are in the community that need to be addressed.
In other words, you're saying that you're saying that they're dealing with the developers instead of helping the residents, and and so eventually the benefits of the deal go to the developers instead of the residents.
Well, when you put in a position, whereas that's the only way you can bring any income to the community, you'd rather bring some than to bring none, because developers have options. The community doesn't. So when politicians are in a seat that they're holding where the people that they serve are basically poor people that don't have the money to support them in campaign measures and things like that, they end up negotiating because of the factor that they're getting Black votes. However, they're not getting the support of the community because the community is in disparity and doesn't really have it. So that, and I'm not taking up for politicians, understand this. I'm for the people and what works for the people. And this is what I mean by stepping on toes. I'm going to continue to talk about the stepping on toes thing, because then you're sitting this in the lap of the politicians. But I don't mind sitting it in the lap of the politicians anymore, because that's the lap it should sit in. And that's the only way we're going to get things to change structurally or reform in the Black community so that it does grow, is that the leadership understands that there shouldn't, that the community shouldn't be negotiated into further inequities. Okay, so, but again, from a standpoint of a civic leader, someone who was told that if I changed the chamber from the name of the community and made it a certain way, that they would get more money. But we have stood back and we have raised our own money. We decided not to take certain, nothing had to do with the county, but we decided not to get involved with certain local politicians that were doing certain things. Have we suffered from that? Absolutely, because we should be much further. And I'll take that to the Harvey Area Chamber, because you did ask the question. The Harvey Area Chamber was started back in 2002. Actually, we started in 2002, and it was because of the disadvantage of Black and brown workers, predominantly Hispanic and Black, predominantly Black, but Hispanic workers and businesses that were in the city of Harvey, Illinois at the time. I went to Harvey as an urban planner. Okay, I moved from Oak Park as an urban planner. And because I understand the dynamics of urban planning and you're trying to interact with your own culture and even other cultures, it's more important that you live in the area. And the community was at that point in time being restructured and going a different direction. However, again, you get in the middle of political collusion and just a systemic measure of political toil, political, just a lot of things, just a lot of things. And mind you, I will say, being a resident, I am a resident of Harvey. Okay.
What's the difference between the Harvey Area Chamber and the Harvey Chamber of Commerce?
Harvey Area Chamber and Harvey Chamber of Commerce are the same thing.
Okay.
Are the same thing. We changed the name because the Chicagoland South Chamber was the original Harvey Chamber of Commerce. And we had our website, we had some issues with our website and some other things, and people wanting to use the Harvey Chamber of Commerce as a resource for funding, but not helping to fund the focal of a socioeconomic chamber. The Harvey Area Chamber has been a socioeconomic chamber since its beginning. I understood as a co-founder of the chamber and writing the bylaws and being a part of the community that there needed to be a socioeconomic issues were not popular in 2002. You're dealing with a thing of what's popular in society as well. Okay, so with the whole issue with the Rodney King beating and all of that stuff, that put an impact in California, not Chicago. Okay, and there's a lot of, we're dealing now with a lot of the backdoor issues with politics in the Chicago, Cook County, and all of the other counties and the state of Illinois, period. First of all, Illinois is in the top 3 most convoluted and colluded states in the United States, along with the fact that it's one of the most racist states. That's statistics. You could Google that.
Are you saying like the top 3 most corrupt when you say colluded?
Corrupt.
Mhm.
Well, convoluted, colluded, all of that, because when you get into the whole policy and procurement measures of the history of Illinois, you're dealing with the reason why it is the way it is. This is one of the only states that had a black tax.
Hang on. This is WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM. And we have with us at Wizard via Zoom, Andrea Paxton, co-founder of Illinois Black Wall Street and also co-founder of the Harvey Area Chamber. And we also have with us Bill Morton, president of the Rogers Park Chamber of Commerce. So Andrea, you just continue. I had to do my station ID.
So when you're dealing with the whole background issue and again, younger, in 1991, I was 24 years old, okay? And with a daughter, with a 4-year-old child. And my goal was not to be an urban planner at that time. My goal has always been to be a part of inclusion and to be an activist on whatever level I could to bring justice in general. Those are the shoulders I stand on in my family and outside of my family. And so I'm always, I mean, when I lived in Oak Park, I did a lot with the schools on the west side. I actually wrote the inclusion for the Austin Madison Street corridor, the Damon and Washington corridor, before the portions of the Henry Horner was torn down. I actually did a whole write-up on institutionalized housing, where brick cities, as they call them, with brick housing projects with no yards and no form of outside interaction for children. And
What is the, if we may ask, what is the purpose of institutionalized housing? Is it to, there aren't any opportunities offered to people who live in institutionalized housing. So when you're as an urban planning, when you look at that housing, do you see the purpose of the institutionalized housing besides having a place to live? But what else is there?
There's gang violence. There's a number of things, gang violence, you name it. I have never. I grew up in rural areas. I grew up in the rural. I grew up as
Well, what I'm asking is this. So when they plan the urban, let's say the institutionalized housing, are they planning to for these cultures to develop? Like they must know that the gangs will develop, etc. Do they situate people in institutionalized housing as part of the plan to let the gangs develop in those areas, and then what else? As an urban planner, what do you see?
What the issue with that is that you know what? Let me. Can I? Okay, I'm gonna explain this, and then can I?
Did you want to share a screen?
Excuse me.
Did you want to share a
Okay,
screen?
so let me explain. So the institutionalized housing, and this is what happens in most communities. Right now we have HUD, the disparities with HUD, the inclusion factors with HUD, saying that we're HUD inequities. Everybody's talking about inequities. However, we have again developers coming in saying that they're trying to make change in the Black community and they want to put equities back in the Black community. So how is it that you're putting equity into a Black community with over 200 or 300 vacant foreclosed homes, but you're going to build a high rise for housing? Doesn't make good sense. You would think those dollars would be focused into first-time home buyers and helping the owners in most of the economically distraught communities who are who have suffered, who pay high taxes, and their houses are so undervalued. The actual value of their house versus what they've actually paid for it. Some of them still in 30-year mortgages, and the housing value is not there. And they bought their house 3 or 4 times. You would think that these particular ordinances and mandates would be focused on putting money back into pre-existing, putting into homeowners that are pre-existing in the community to upgrade their homes, not building new homes beside them, disadvantaging them more and putting them out of their homes.
Well, actually, it's funny that you mentioned that, Andrea. Bill and I were actually attending one of the meetings at Small Business Advisory Council about transit-oriented development. And we were also asking questions about development. And is there any plan to put the development dollars back into improving the housing stock that is there, such as perhaps apartments that people are living in but need money to improve, to revitalize, to repair, in addition to the money being put into transit-oriented development?
Again, the when it comes down to it's a system. Development should be a system. When it comes to transit-oriented development, that is the state and the federal government saying, okay, we're gonna fix our streets here. We're gonna really do some serious work on this whole corridor. Then we have our state planning and our regional planning agencies that are supposed to interact with the local planning agencies. Well, when you have local leadership that doesn't understand that process, and the higher leaderships are not pushing towards that, this has been a systemic matter over a period of time where those connections haven't been there, and this is what's happening with CTA and RTA now. And it's a wonderful thing that people are putting some of the puzzles together, pieces to the puzzle together, is that when transit-oriented development goes on, it is actually that transit-oriented development. You want the corridor where the development is going on to be developed. That's opportunity for local businesses to get what should be tips that are put in place by the community to build the economic value in that particular area and push those corridors throughout that particular community or area or city. But it should be a systemic matter. You cannot, like the Hosted Corridor project right now that's coming through Harvey, it starts with Harvey, I think it goes to 72nd Street. However, prior to that, there was a corridor development that was from 72nd Street back further north. It has to go down the corridor. So then they're going down the corridor. So you've got Harvey, you've got Riverdale, you've got the south side of Chicago, the 95th Roseland area. You've got you've got Inglewood, that's all the way stretched down that corridor. That gives each one of those quadrants and areas the ability to have a planning component to go to be in place, to empower or to add equity starting in those corridors. Now, the streets that are not state or county, or that are not state or county or federal roads, they have to be developed as well. So part of those corridor developments should be the local community planning to put dollars, CDBG dollars or partnering dollars, to go along those corridors to fix those inner streets too. However, because of the lack of local housing taxes that are put into those regions and those areas to rebuild, the dollars aren't there to fix the local street. But you got the main street here, the main corridor for the transportation here, that's awesome, that looks good. But then you have all the side streets where the people are on their way home. There's a lot of potholes. Why? Because like 3 out of 5 houses in a block is vacant. So then as a planner, the focus should be for HUD to put dollars into those communities, or those communities, HUD can put the dollars out there. The community has to have the vision behind the dollars. And that vision cannot come with private developers or equity buyers buying up all the homes and making it a transit community. That's what the city of Harvey has become. It's a
Isn't it like that in other cities as well, in addition to Harvey?
Yeah, other cities and like I said, when I say transient, I mean that all of the dollars, 95% of the people who work in Harvey live outside of Harvey, and the people who live in Harvey work outside the community. And that is, yeah, they work outside the community. That's the reason why you have such a transition of workers going to, well, now we have the Amazon there. That, I mean, that's a plus, where the people can work in the, in that Amazon facility. Hopefully, prayerfully, a majority of the community people can work there. However, you have a number of large international trade companies located right in Harvey that hire or employ less than 5% of the population. So when you have this aggregate of things that are going on, again, you talked about the local politicians and the aldermen. They have to be educated and understand the dynamics of making sure that those local ordinances are in place that empower and bring jobs and workforce to the community. They have to also be focused on the fact that housing development can't be added development to what's already been depleted. You have to build from what's been torn down. And that is the whole homeowner fabric of the Black communities have been torn down. Again, 2 out of 5 houses in a block are vacant and foreclosed. And now you have equity investors going to the bank, buying up bulk. They're chasing the development.
So I think what you're kind of saying is that politicians, they need the money, they need the development, and then they need the votes. But if they were to rely entirely on the residents, helping the residents don't have the dollars to help them in their campaign for election. However, the developers that come in to build a new housing stock, those are the ones that could give them the campaign contributions for them to remain in office.
In some cases, that is so. However, again, when you take the focus off of dollars and you put it on the fact that those developers actually have the money to put something in the community, and most politicians, their focus, there are aldermen, even commissioners, they're looking for development. They're looking for development, and they're pushed up. And again, it's a two-edged sword. It's a double-edged sword. So then, when you're coming in, when it comes to activism, you don't want the people to think that you're focused on politicians and their investments, because that's not the case. You also don't want the politicians to think that you are, or it doesn't matter what they think, people are going to think what they want to think, but you don't want to take the position as an activist that gives leverage to people who don't understand system, and they should hire people that have a better understanding when it comes down to that development process. And we have planning agencies that are in place that are supposed to aid and assist on the local development. However, the planning agencies that, quote unquote, are government agencies, usually lean more towards the developers as opposed to the whole focal on the whole community and their situations. That's the reason why nothing changes unless we reform policy and the procurement of policy. And that's what Black Wall Street is all about, to make impact on the community. If the businesses are built, if business corridors are rebuilt in the Black community, that means that more Black people will stay in their community and be able to flourish in their own communities. That means that less of the employment, the tax dollars go outside the community, both state and county taxes. That means that young Black people have mentors to look up to in their own communities that look like them, to say that they can become or be, or these things are handed down. Students come back home to live from college instead of moving to other areas, because where they came from is a heartache. Where they came from has not changed. Their parents and their grandparents are trying to hold on to the legacy of being homeowners and property owners, or business owners and struggling in that community. And a lot of them don't want to come back. And seriously, then you have the family left with the factor of having their young Black son come back, and they're the owner of a business, getting in the way of gun violence or robbery. So again, systemic servitude, systemic racism, systemic issues in general, systemic policy that does not work for underprivileged communities. And I'll even take it to the rural communities and the reservations. Some of these things exist in the rural communities and the reservations as well. And there aren't, and I'm talking about completely 100% Caucasian rural communities, because some of them are uneducated. They're the daughters and sons and second, third generations of farmers, and they're making money. They're doing things positive in that community, but they don't coexist or travel outside of that community. So they only have the education of where they grew up. So to take it from it being completely a Black thing, it's not just a Black thing, it's just predominantly a Black thing. And it's an implanted Black thing. A rural Caucasian community can come together and say a few words and shake a couple people, and they get what they need. A Black community, on the other hand, has to struggle, riot, and implode within itself to get those kind of responses.
Well, if we know that you're trying to work so that HB 1960 passes, and then you would get a change of policy. But meanwhile, let's say that without that, let's say if you were an alderman or a local politician, what tools do you have to address these inequities if you don't have that HB 1960 in place?
Well, that's the reason why, from a local standpoint, area standpoint, with a local chamber, that was totally against the corrupt government, and working to assist and aid the businesses that were that are a part and were a part of that unit. You would have that. That's the reason why the umbrella program, the umbrella focal was put in place with Illinois Black Wall Street, because it's a statewide and a national issue. Now, I can't say that all people have the level of education or understanding that I have of how these things are put together. And that's the reason why, instead of giving my essays to certain entities, I'm going to publish them. I'm actually putting a policy and procurement book together, or if you would, from the focal of different communities, because when you are a planner, you're basically writing plans for different communities. I'm not, like I said, I'm an independent contractor, so that even and on purpose. On purpose. I came to Harvey wanting to work for the government. However, I noticed and actually interacting with all the other planners that work and interacting, when you're working for the government, you have to do what the government says, not oppose the government and talk about what should be done as opposed to what's systemically being done, if you would. And I believe the government is supported and made by the people, and it should support the people in that same magnitude. And so, from a planning standpoint, when you are a planner for municipal government, you have to deal with that political. You have to, you must, to keep your job. When you're an independent contractor, you write the facts on what is. It's up to that government to take those facts, or the government, if you would, to take those factors and use them. And when it comes to House Bill 1960, the whole reason why the bill is held up in the Senate is because when the bill came out and we did our best to communicate with the primary carriers of the bill or presenters of the bill, and there was no response. However, so then we put out letters to all of the people supporting the bill, because the bill was signed completely through House. It is a bill that no one can deny. These are things that can't be denied that happen. These are facts of what has happened to the economy in the state of Illinois. This is all of the documents. I mean, all of the studies and documentations. This was compilated into, and I basically did an essay on it prior, and a study on the whole thing. And several of the colleges did studies as well. And a lot of the information the information is taken from those studies. And so these are facts, not makeup, not dreamt up. These are facts. So in order to resolve that issue and to bring some recompense to the Black community in the state of Illinois, there needs to be a reform in how the Black communities are funded. And one of the main focuses are the Black business and the historical Black Wall Street districts that were destroyed, that brought money and resources to the community, that spoke to the food desert issue, that spoke to the inequity issues for grassroots businesses and the partnering with commercial in the commercial industry.
If House Bill 1960 were to pass, then there would be enough funding for the urban planners in the Black Wall Street districts that you mentioned to address the problems that you've been describing, such as the food deserts? Okay.
So then the money isn't for the urban planners. The money is actually directed towards, well, the way the bill was written, I didn't write the bill. The bill was written and taken from, the majority of that bill was taken from the House resolution that I did write. And because if I had written that bill or was any part of that bill, we wouldn't be struggling to advocate for the amendments to that bill. And we are lobbying for ourselves and rallying in other organizations to work with us, because it impacts the Black communities and an aggregate of small businesses in the Black community, because the bill isn't directed basically, or neither was House Resolution 1320 directed basically towards what type of businesses. Why? Because you cannot put a cookie cutter bill in place to impact all communities, even if they're Black communities, because they all have different issues. Even though the core economic issue is what it is, the core inequities are what they are. However, they are designed with different needs. So with that being said, the bill was written for there to be bonding, local bonds put in place. The Treasury already approved and that they would support this. The local government has to package bonds and put the bonds in place, TIFs in place, if you would, to match the $5 million increments that would be put in 10 communities a year over the next 10 years to help rebuild the base. So there would be a level of local and federal need for that. Which the federal component with the Department of Treasury has been met. So then you have to have the local, which it would be state or county earmarks that would help that whole situation move to the next level. But what it would do with the dollars that have been put out, it would sustain the businesses that are currently being rebuilding, and it would also incubate and rebuild those corridors, which make all the difference in the world. So then the way the bill was structured, it did not impact. And again, the procurement, the cover, the summary, the bill summary on the cover looked great and it looked awesome. But when you got into the procurement and the numbers, the percentiles, as it pertains to the number of the populations and different things like that, it was cookie cutter, and it did not impact Prop 20. It didn't impact 20 out of the almost 35. Well, as we go, we're finding more and more out. So approximately, I'm gonna say approximately, when we first started, there was a total of 40 Black communities and subquadrants. So we can't just think municipalities and villages and things like that. We have to think on a basis, and this is what I mean by cookie cutter. It can't be just focused on local, small municipalities when it comes to the state of Illinois. You have little subquadrants in larger communities that are Black subquadrant communities that are impoverished. Look at Kankakee, big example. Kankakee. Look at the Kankakee itself is not earmarked or it's not considered to be an impoverished community. The median income in Kankakee, in the Kankakee County, Kankakee is around $50,000 a year. However, you have at least 4 to 6 subquadrant Black communities within Kankakee that are impoverished. One particularly, Pembroke, Hopkins, considered the most impoverished community in the United States and one of the first chartered Black communities in the United States. You have Robbins, which was one of the first Black villages incorporated, in the state of Illinois. So these are historically impoverished communities. So again, I go back to, it has to be a systemic, the same way the systemic racism and the systemic inequity issues exist, it has to be systemic reform. It has to be policy and procurement written to reform what exists and move into the sustainability of those communities, homeowners, businesses, and I'm going to say this and boldly say this. And if the municipal government and aldermen need to be changed, state reps, whatever, then that needs to happen, because that seems like, it looks like what you're looking for. But yes, that goes without being said. That goes without being said, unless they are going to, it's a difference. You do better when you know better. In some cases, maybe they didn't know. But now it's so big and broad, you have to want to figure it out if your focal is for the people in the community as opposed to careers. Your career is of a public servant. So your public servancy has to speak to your career. So if that's what you're looking for from me, you have it 100%. And I go without any type of moral or business intimidation or otherwise when it comes to that. In the past, I have tried to understand or give, again, when you're a planner, you write the plan, you give it, or you sit on the boards and the committees. I've been told to sign documents saying that we wouldn't charge to sit on committees about inclusion. And I did it for free. So then to see those inclusion factors taken, and all the communities around the community that we did the inclusion and did the prospectus on, to see those communities flourish and the Black communities in those areas consistently go further and further. The crime continue to raise. So if that's what you're looking for from me, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm not protecting anybody. I am on no side but the sides of justice and the side that's going to stop the injustice in predominantly Black community, all communities, but the predominantly Black communities that are being impacted. And that's what House Bill 1960, that was that the core was 1320. That what 1320 was talking about, the resolution was talking about, and what needed to be done. And 1960 does not, and it needs to be amended, and we're asking the governor to overstep, if would be, and amend this bill so that it helps impact Black communities across the state of Illinois.
So Andrew, what steps do you need to take? What do you need to pass these amendments to the bill?
We need more momentum. We need, because evidently the state representatives that put it into play, evidently they thought that, I was joking, we didn't make a big deal out of it. There are certain legalities that I can't talk about because we are raising some legal, because there's been no movement, and it's almost been as if it's been quieted, and we don't want the bill to be we don't want the bill silenced. We don't want the bill vetoed. So we want that bill passed, and we know the governor can do it. And he has been a governor that has rallied in the Black community. But it goes back to what you said. It is not the governor's job to come and do local plans.
Mm-hmm.
It's no governor's job to do local plans. It's no governor's job to do state plans. It's up to the elected officials to make those things happen. And we know that numbers count. So we're asking for groups like yours, chambers like yours, to come and be a part thereof. And
are there any other areas in the country that have a similar plan that's working? Andrea, I think you froze up. You might have buffered. Just if necessary, just leave and come back in.
So I would imagine, yeah, she looks like she's frozen up. I would imagine witness slips and letter campaign and petition signatures from different chambers of commerce and community organizations. That's usually how it goes with the House bills and amending the bills. And I did have some questions that because this is so intriguing, and my mind is just going with all these different conversations. She mentioned the streets, how they're funded and repaved by city, state, and county, but she mentioned that the side streets are ignored and only funded by real estate taxes or by the local taxes. She didn't say real estate taxes, but she inferred that because there's so many abandoned properties, the money isn't coming in to properly tend to the street and road infrastructure on those side streets. And I was going to ask her, well, then who owns the side streets? Whose responsibility is it? Is it just what I'm saying? And then also another thought came to me about an interview that we did on television in the past about Englewood, and about all the abandoned properties in Englewood, and about predatory loans and rent-to-own scams. Mm-hmm. that they promised the Black families that they could rent these houses and then eventually purchase them for $1, and the property owner, the real estate investor, decided to say nope, no way, and they kicked them out. And they just got more people to come in and do the scam with a fresh bunch of families, and that kept Englewood abandoned, with abandoned buildings, and kept them down, kept them poor systematically. And that was the predatory loans by banks and other lenders, and by real estate property owners, property investors. So those kind of thoughts just kind of came to my mind during the interview so far.
Let me see if she messaged me. Hang on just a second.
And another thing about this is we had a recent interview on Wizard, and we were talking about you know, impoverished communities and the gangs, and maybe 80% we were told of people in those neighborhoods never leave their neighborhood, never get to see downtown, never travel out of the state, and never get to see different perspectives or you know, how other people live, or you know, and how downtown is supposed to be. It's supposed to be for enjoying, and so that was in the earlier interview. And Andrea mentioned something about people not leaving their communities. So there's just a couple thoughts I had, but we were so engaged in the conversation, I didn't want to interrupt the valid points that she was talking about. And then I would say that you know, Lawndale would definitely be a very well-known community with food deserts.
Actually, Lawndale is the same situation, exact same situation as Harvey. There was an article, a news story about 2 weeks ago that mentioned that residents have to travel elsewhere to work, and at least 90% of the jobs inside West Lawndale are held by people that do not live in the community. It's the exact same thing.
Mm-hmm. And then the fronting of the housewives, or the fronting of, you know, for those loans for women and people with disabilities and minorities, and the government grants and loans that are available for those in particular, and how people are faking them out. And you know, we've always known this was happening. I've talked to many entrepreneurs and potential small business owners that were like, well, if I can get my wife to be the owner or a co-owner, I could get this loan. And I think it's far more common than not common.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and the Andrea is back. Let's see if she could
Yeah, those were some of my side questions I didn't want to derail the conversation with.
Andrea, can you hear us? We see your picture, and it seems that as if you are here. So.
And then I was also thinking, before Andrea gets back, I was also thinking about the community meetings for development projects, and how they're in the 49th ward, they're traditionally a dog and pony show, where the alderman already makes the deal with the developer, and then he asked, then they ask, you know, well, what do you think? The community has a voice, and then the community doesn't have a voice because the deal was already done, and it's always proven later. And particularly with the transit-oriented development, which is a relatively new program, and you know, and then sometimes the community says, okay, we agree with this development because of they add these extra facade amenities, which don't really benefit the community. It's just they change the color of something because someone doesn't like the color of the awnings. It's a distraction. It's just like a red herring. And so you know, that happens quite a bit, where, you know, the alderman might agree, but then the developer is not under an actual contract to stick to the promise, and they change it up after they get you know, their variation approved with city council chambers for the extra level, which they always want.
Did you hear that, Andrea? Are you able to talk now?
I am.
Okay.
They're doing work on the outside of the building, and that's why the dogs are losing their mind. And That's the reason why I think we lost our connection for a minute, but because one of the trucks hit one of the construction trucks with the lift hit one of the towers next door down here. Yeah, I'm on a commercial corridor. I'm not at home. I just have my dogs with me most of the time. Uh, my kids are grown, so these are my fur babies. But in any event, moving back into what you were saying, Bill, you're correct. And I've seen, again, that was my reasoning from not necessarily switching, but starting to talk about how public-private partnerships are working and how they should work. There becomes a measure when there's a lack of participation in the community, but it's set up for the lack of participation, because I've been in so many focals or involved in so many grants and different things, or public-private dollar structures where we wrote the participation, but they knew that education needed to be put in there. And even when education is put in there for trades, in the African American community is already in despair. Some of these people are unemployed. I'll go back to the Put Illinois to Work program. Awesome program to get people off of try and get people off of public assistance and put them into workforce. Okay. However, the actual procurement of that whole process was totally a nightmare. Okay, for the employer and the people who are being employed. There was these people needed transportation to go to work. They didn't get paid. You have the period of being paid. And Governor Quinn was awesome. I like Governor Quinn. He did a lot. And I don't care what anybody says. When it comes down to it, as far as I'm concerned, there's some good Republicans and some good Democrats. And I'm just going to be honest about that. I have been Democrat focused, raised Democrat, focused Democrat. However, it never stopped my parents or anybody else that was in political quarters from working with Republicans that focused on getting things done in a perspective that was going to impact the entirety as opposed to a group. And all Republicans don't think the same, and neither do all Democrats, as far as, and from what I've seen, okay? And it doesn't matter if they're Black, white, what nationality, religion, whatever. If it's corrupt, it's corrupt. If it's redlining, it's redlining. It all comes back into the factor that there has to be a component that impacts. It can't be cookie cutter. It has to be a component that's to impact the whole or impact the targeted people. For so long, policy has been written to do what it does. When funding goes to a region, the region is going to spend that money. It does not matter if the people or the communities in that region don't know how to package and put in a package that deal for their local community. It's not going to be handed down and said to them, okay, we'll come, and the assumption is that if you get the title mayor, you know what a mayor is supposed to do. You know what your planners are, the planners are supposed to be a byproduct of the mayor, and so does the alderman. However, that's not the case in most situations, especially in Black communities and rural communities, for that, and even tribal communities. Why? Because there's an exclusion and a seclusion factor that goes along with that. And even with organizations, as I said, I've said on both ends of the spectrum, you try not to step on toes, but there's no way. And at this day and age, with all that I've done and myself, the impact that it's had on me as an entity, as a woman, as a Black woman, as in a minority on all different spectrums in the planning industry, and in the whole spectrum of it, just being a voice, even amongst Black people. With that being said, and I don't have a problem saying it, there is a divide there because things have been away for so long. Again, it's just the way it goes. And when it comes down to getting policy passed and procured to where it impacts the masses in the targeted areas as opposed to the change order that you're talking about, Bill, and the restructuring orders that go on during the procurement process so the money doesn't leave the district or the area, it still despairs that particular community. And instead of people saying, oh my God, I did this wrong in the past, or this hasn't been right in the past, let me fix it. Let me be the change agent. Let me be the reform agent. It's like nobody wants to go against the grain. Everybody wants to be in the clique. And if all of us are in the boat and none of the people in the boat are throwing out safety rafts, we're drowning everybody, right?
And nobody wants to admit they've been wrong, and everyone's ego gets in the way, and greed too, and in many cases.
And so it's up to the ones of us that understand that to put into place things that are going to make it different. Put in things into place that are going to where we're going to work together, and make it different. It doesn't matter if you're like yourself in Rogers Park. You don't have to tell me what Rogers Park is, but you're the president for the chamber. So you have to address the need of your population if that's what you want to genuinely stand as and be known as. And you can't be worried about who's going to say what. You have to address the need of the population in Rogers Park.
Yes.
Yeah, and it can't be driven. In most chambers, that's the other thing. Black Wall Street, the chamber, we're not driven by politicians. We're not. The base, the core of what these organizations were founded on was not political. Do we need the politicians? Absolutely. Do we need them to address these? Absolutely. But do we have the power, and can we work with other organizations to make an impact, to make sure that if these politicians don't do what they're supposed to do, we can put ones in that will, and ones that are focused in the same factor that we are on the people and the businesses in the community? Yes, we can.
Yes. And that's the great part about it. We can.
That's the whole reason why chambers were created in the first place, were to give the businesses a voice. And that voice wasn't the voice. That's because of the factor that there is such a structure of discrimination. There is such a structure of political discrimination and degradation when it comes down to businesses. So then chambers were formed in the very first place so that the businesses could come together and balance themselves out. Being that there's such a diversity now, the chambers have to think, or the chamber leaders have to, and organization leaders, activists have to think diverse when it comes down to them being in representation of the business and the climate. I don't know if you guys are a socioeconomic chamber, but we focus on the community as well. The community,
we are.
The income of the community supports the businesses.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So if you have no residents, all your businesses closed.
A lot of times people don't understand that. They associate the Chamber of Commerce with maybe the US Chamber of Commerce, but we broke from them after we were chartered because we don't agree with their lobbying efforts at all whatsoever.
Exactly. And we're chartered, the Harvey area chamber is chartered as well.
And they didn't do anything. I asked them for when the renewal came up after the first year, I said, well, what are you going to do to help us stimulate our local economy? What are you going to do to support our local businesses rather than this big Washington, D.C. lobbyist effort that we don't agree with? If you could do something that could help our local economy, that can help us to help them, then I could justify the second year and so on and so forth. But they didn't give me any answer on that at all whatsoever.
Was that recent?
No, it was a long time ago. It was a long time ago. I could revisit, but that was a while.
They're now trying to do, and I'm not advocating for them. I know that we've been interacting with them over the last several years, and it's been better than other quote unquote supposedly nationally known chambers. And we're always going to get in the business of politics. However, we have to understand that, you know, politicians are public servants and we service the public as well, but we advocate. We are the advocacy for the public. We are the advocacy for the businesses, whether grassroots or international. We have to balance that playing field, and leadership does that.
Yes.
This is WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM, and we have with us via Zoom on WZRD, Andrea Paxton, co-founder of Illinois Black Wall Street and also co-founder of the Harvey Chamber of Commerce, and we have with us Bill Morton, president of the Rogers Park Chamber of Commerce. Andrea, before you dropped out earlier with the technical difficulties, I think we were asking about whether the Illinois Black Wall Street program, is there anything like it that has been implemented in other areas? And if so, how did it influence the community?
No, there hasn't. And that's why we wanted it to be a pilot, and we want to reform what's there. We don't want it to be like what's going on in other communities. Now, there are other communities with different types of pilot programs. However, this was meant to basically be the engine for the roadmap, if you would, into reform of the economic focus in the Black communities in the state of Illinois. Now, we are also doing some things abroad with other national organizations as well as it pertains to this. However, we're specifically talking about the engines that, or the cure to the inequity, or the start of the cure. I mean, the cure is so far behind. You know, it took a pandemic for it to even be a focal, and then even in some places it still isn't nationally. So locally, again, I go back to Illinois is in the top 5, top 3 of 5, and like I said, these are things you can Google, and that it is known for its corruption and discrimination history. So at the end of the day, as I was saying, you know, we are wanting to be that pilot. We are wanting to start that engine and to use this pilot to show that it can be done, because it can be. It can be.
And the legislators are not bringing it into. Has it gone out of committee? What's the next step for?
It's still hung in committee, but I think a lot of that is because we did not know about the first 2 hearings. I think that was on purpose. But we had informed the legislators that we wanted to be inclusive. And DECA is an awesome statewide organization. However, I don't think DECA necessarily speaks to all the local needs either. And I feel that it takes the local and state components that are the liaison, that are the people who are in the trenches, to actually speak and sit with DECA when it comes down to the procurement process and actually the training process on a number of these things. But this, like I said, the bill passed through the House. It's stuck in the Senate. And I think a big part of that is because, you know, we wrote letters to all of the Illinois Black Wall Street and the supporters, our board and the supporters. We have at least, well, we've gotten up to now a total of 150 organizations that we want to represent. And the core of it is that we get the groups that are segregated. And like I said, there's a reason why Black groups are segregated amongst themselves. And that's mainly because we, in different areas, we have different needs. And that's by design as well, because if I tell you that I'm going to give you a half a cookie and you're excited about your half a cookie, you get what I'm saying? But that half a cookie only impacts your area. It's only going to feed the people in your little quadrant, your community. However, and then I tell, you know, another chamber president or organization that we're going to give them crumbs, and that's what they have to use to, you know, so then there's automatically going to be a problem there. And then, like I said, it's an aggregate of things. It's not just one. We got to start somewhere. And that start, especially with the issue with violence and the destructive issues in Black communities, we have to start somewhere. We have to make communities, Black communities, communities again. Again, they're transit communities, you know, and they're not transit communities with people that are homeowners. They don't transit. You get what I'm saying? It's not transit with career people. It's transit with impoverished people that are moving. They're moving from area to area to create income. And that goes back to the big housing projects and the big housing components that are being funded. That's if you're in an area where you have 300 or 400 vacant houses, why would you bring an investor in to focus on basically another housing project? Because that's what it becomes. If people don't come in and buy condominiums and they're not already pre-sold prior or there's at least leases that are pre-drawn in the process of building or completing those units, guess what? The money has to be made one way or the other. Even if the property is taken off the tax, you still have a major structure in a community that is taken off the tax bracket in a prime area that's causing that community or that area dollars. So again, I go back to, it can't be, dollars can't be put into more poverty, into continuous methods to impoverish and to keep people in the system. When I was talking about the Put Illinois to Work program, like I said, the holes in the program were that, you know, we're talking about taking people had to qualify and be in the DCFS, in the DHS system. You know, and we have laws out here now that say, in as far as the bonds and the TIFs are concerned, laws that mandates the 230% impoverished. Right. We're not a third world country. Are we trying to create that in the communities for them to have to be 100% impoverished? Seems like too much impoverishment at all, but to earmark impoverishment at 200% or over 200% or over 100, that is absolutely nonsense.
What are they?
With the tax incremented financing, the TIF program, it's my understanding that funding is to go towards blighted areas, to improve blighted, and that's all. Am I wrong, or is there something else to it?
Well, no, TIFs are for different things. And TIFs can be used in any community. Tax increment funding, tax increment funding is used in Hoffman Estates. Okay. Any community can increment tax funds or bonds towards an area that they want to develop, where a developer is coming in with matching or otherwise. Okay, that's not the issue. The TIF funding, though, that comes into impoverished communities, specifically Black communities, it comes in with developers that are there's if you notice, there's no intent to establish or build or reform the focal of development in the community or the economy. It's more of the fact that they're getting double their money back for their investment over a period of time. That's what equity, and most of the developers that come into impoverished areas or Black areas are equity interest investors. These are investors that buy a property. Property is always value. You could buy $10,000 properties and get $100,000 in an equity line to rehab another property. This is how long I've been in the industry, because I didn't start off as an urban planner. I started off as a certified commercial investment representative, representing the people who buy up communities. And when I learned this is what was happening, then of course, yes, I have a moral obligation to not do this. Yes, it's a lot of money. It made me a lot of money. However, at some point, you get what I'm saying? It made me a lot of, and it still could make me a lot of money. I could go and walk back into that industry any day now and say, hey guys, it didn't work for me because they told me it wasn't. And I don't have the money that I did then.
So you're referring to like property investors or property investors as people who are utilizing funds from TIFs and other places and off maybe mortgages or whatever, or loans off other properties, so they don't have to use money to make their investments at all with that strategy.
Well, it's like any other investments. You want streams of income. You want to put things in place that are going to make you more money than it costs you. Okay. So then in these cases, they're making more money than it costs them to develop. And if the land is being given to you and you're just you're going to double your profits and just putting a building on the land, because the land isn't as profitable without a building as it is with a building. And if you were not paying taxes like all the rest of the people that are paying taxes, okay? And this is not saying that investments are bad. Investments are good. That's what makes the economy, is people investing and reinvesting. The issue with being an equity investor or an investor or a developer is if you're creating your generational wealth is at the demise of other people.
And what is the purpose again of the people being under 230% poverty level? How does that help the let's say HUD, and what is the purpose?
That was one of the procurements put in. That was one that is a change that I need to look up. Matter of fact, it sounds like that's the bill that you were talking about as it pertains to the TIFs. There was a bill that was put out by a Republican senator, I think it is, that wants to change the percentage of impoverishment needed to get tips. Now, but that's still geared toward low income communities. Like I said, tax increment funding is something that can be used anywhere. It's not just about low income communities with tax increment funding. And people will say tax bonds, in other communities, they say tax bonds. You get what I'm saying? In impoverished communities, they say tax incremented funding. It's the same thing. A tax bond, with just a couple of differences based on the way they're packaged.
And this does have to do with why people have to be at the 230% impoverishment line.
Okay. So that particular, I would rather, because I wasn't prepared for, I just made that as one, I just used that as an example of some of the procurement or some of the guidelines impacting impoverished or economically struggling Black communities or communities in general, is the fact that the earmarks are set where only certain people are going to get the money in the first place. You get what I'm saying? At 200 and, so if we're talking regionally, okay, this would harshly impact an impoverished community. However, when it comes down to the region, it would not, because the money is going to stay in the region. And if you have another community next door or out or within that region that meets a qualification, or there is a change or restructuring, which they will do to keep money in a region to get those dollars for another community, it'll happen. That's what's been happening.
How would the Black Wall Street program account for transparency? When marijuana became legalized, Blacks could barely get their feet in the door. Would there be any assurances that it would be really Black people accessing the funds and not the shell companies?
And that's exactly what we just got done talking about. And that's one of the things that, that's one of the procurement. If you look at the amendments that we addressed, as far as the actual program and the bill were concerned, we addressed the fact that the bill only earmarked, or the bill only would benefit certain Black communities even. So again, there is no, there are no alliances when it comes down to something that I feel. And again, legally, I don't know if the bill was presented to the people, to the two state reps who actually, but they should have read it. They should have had someone who was in planning look at it, and they should have critiqued it, or they should have called the person that wrote 1320. It would have been that simple. Or talk to the state rep that actually had 1320 put into, made 1320 a House resolution, and maybe there would have been a better understanding of a Black Wall Street bill, or just even actually looked in their system. Because when we were writing the Black Wall, when I actually lended my essay to the writing of the Black Wall Street House resolution, we actually went backwards and forth as to if it had been written before. And I actually researched to see that there had not been a resolution or a bill in the state of Illinois called the Black Wall Street Bill or program written. Well, there was no program then. We were just trying to establish the House resolution for the organization being a statewide organization, which we raised all the funding to do the research, to do the tours and everything. We took no money from anybody. Now, State Representative LaShawn Ford actually was one of the co-founders of the Chicago Black Wall Street in the very, very beginning, and he supported the Tulsa. We asked him to help with the funding of the trip to Tulsa, and he sponsored the trip with 20 businesses from the state of Illinois in Tulsa. And some of those businesses had family members who had migrated to Chicago. Tulsa and Chicago are connected that way because a lot of the people who were in the bombing, a number of the people, and even though they weren't able to reestablish their businesses in Chicago, they moved to Chicago because Chicago was the main smelting pot at that time, and gave them some hope because other Black businesses and a predominant amount of Black homeowners were here in Chicago. So.
But the housing stock still, there are still a lot of vacancies despite the housing stock in Chicago, in the blighted neighborhoods.
Excuse me?
I just mentioned that the blighted neighborhoods still, despite the housing stock, there is still a lot of vacancies in that housing stock that is being wasted in the blighted neighborhoods.
Well, yeah, there are. And that's the whole reason that I mean, most of those communities, though, you know, are having HUD projects where there are large multi-unit buildings being built.
Exactly.
As opposed to those houses. Those houses are now being bought up mainly by equity investors. And again,
right.
if you cannot get homeowners in an area, it's going to government subsidy renting.
But
We want to do Section 8 to homeowners, where instead of the government paying for 3 generations of subsidized housing, that they'll pay for one house in 15 years to be handed down in a family. Now that's reform. That's putting back into an economy. That's putting back into that's creating a generational wealth mechanism when a house will be handed down as opposed to a Section 8 certificate.
Mm-hmm. And but that isn't included in the HB 1960, right? This is it's just another idea that could help.
No, it was included in the essay for the House Resolution 1320.
Oh.
Okay, because see, we did not, again, I go back to, let me clarify. Illinois Black Wall Street did not write or participate in the beginnings of House Bill 1960.
Mm-hmm.
It was written and produced as a result of 1320. Now, how that whole component came together, I don't know. What I do know is that the bill looks exactly like the House resolution, and you have a copy of them both. And we're asking people, the people that were involved and wanted to see the House resolution go into place, and it did. And the people who are going to benefit from 1960 from a systemic standpoint, from a sustainability standpoint, then the program itself would include the housing component and the business component. So we, as Illinois Black Wall Street, we would have positioned from a socioeconomic standpoint than just from an economic standpoint that benefited a few.
Mm-hmm.
So each community, if it had been done the way that our focal was in the seed of building the economic base, is putting food back into the grocery stores back into the community, no matter what grocery store. It doesn't have to be a Jewel's. I mean, look at Pete's. There are numerous, or it could be a local private owned grocery store. Black farmers are suffering. So then to be able to, for them to bring their produce to Black owned local Black-owned stores, and that would actually keep the survival of the Black farmers who are suffering. So things have not changed. So we're talking, and again, I go back to what my heritage is and where I was raised and how I grew up. And we still have the same problem that's evolved, and I'm 54 years old. It's just, it's just more corporately structured these days. That's all.
So if HB 1960 were to pass, that would be sufficient to help bring in the the investment for the community, such as a grocery store, etc. That
Yes, that would help.
Okay.
The whole focus in rebuilding Black business corridors,
Mhm.
or even the Black Wall Street units. They all had grocery stores. They
Mhm.
had recreation facilities for the children.
Right.
They had
They were
resources.
self-sufficient. Right.
Exactly. So that's the whole premise, is that the community gets a push start on being self-sufficient and bringing the dollars, the economic dollars back to the taxes, recirculating them in the community, and then going out abroad, because the same businesses in the community will do international trade. Creating one grocery store owner becomes a franchise or a corporate unit if we've got 20 communities or over 20 communities in the state of Illinois that need grocery stores. And like I said, that's a bare minimum. That was, like I said, that was mainly municipality and city and village driven. But we're up to almost 50 subquadrants and communities in the state of Illinois that need grocery stores, and that need, just a mall that facilitates the basic need of the community. And that bill at this point, just to your point, when the bill was revised after we sent in the first information to the committees, and mind you, we were not there for the actual committee meeting, and I feel like it was only two. And I feel like that was by design, because we are on the list to be notified when the bill was to be heard. And because we were not engaged by the state legislators that actually put the bill together to be passed, their assumption, I feel that the bill was to go through no matter what. But because we wrote the committees, we actually personally emailed and wrote each person supporting.
Each community member, each committee member, you mean?
Exactly.
Okay.
And sent those amendments and to them, and that's probably the reason why it's sitting in committee still, and it's not being talked about. And that's the whole reason why I'm here today.
That's a very common dirty trick in Chicago City Council, where they'll tell you the hearing is another day if they feel there's opposition to their pre-made plan and they don't want community input or outrage. It's corruption, and it's it's just the corruption of how the government is, the politicians are, the elected officials are, and I'm just so sorry that you didn't get to go there. And it disgusts me that this kind of corruption is happening every day.
Well,
So-
we're going, even if we have to go with picket signs, we're going. So are you in, Bill?
Oh yeah, the Rogers Park Chamber of Commerce, we're in. I'll sign your petition, sign your witness slip, or come on down if I can. You got our support.
Excellent. Bring some of your businesses too, because it's going to take, and we're not going to let this go. We want this passed before, we want it passed with the amendments either pending or the amendments done before this election is up.
When is the next committee hearing? What is the next for this bill? Is it just sitting in committee without if there's nobody to help bring it out of committee?
Yeah, there is sitting in committee, but somebody's going to jump on board because we're going public within the next 5 days. So well, we're already public, but we're going public with Force and Impact. And again, that's why I'm on your show, is to talk about this and to get people and to go to change.com, Illinois Black Wall Street. And I have 1320, this sign, the map, this is the map of Illinois, and it's broken down into the actual Black communities, and we don't have the formula on. We're not going to publicize the formula until we actually get what we need to get to pull together get what we need to get in pulling these amendments together to have all of the communities that have been impacted, that were impacted by the whole Red Summer Black Wall Street movement addressed, specifically having the most impoverished communities addressed first. Yeah, so we want the most impoverished communities and especially the historically impoverished communities to be addressed, and that this wave of dollars go according to the poverty rate, as opposed to who's popular and who put the bill through. So with that being said, that's exactly what we're rallying for.
Can you share with us some of the organizations that are working with you?
Actually, we have at least 10 Black Wall Street quadrants across the state. And it's been in southern Illinois, Peoria. We have portions of St. Louis. We have so we've got several Black Wall Street. We have several Black people who have, or Black groups who have also bought blocks, and they want to make them the Black Wall Street corridors in their community.
We saw that in 1960 there were designated like about 10 different areas, including the west side of Chicago, and including Richton Park, Harvey, and Calumet City, etc. So though in those areas, do you have who do you have in those areas that are helping you with this? Is it the chambers of commerce? What kind of support do you have?
Like I said, there are chambers like and from a chamber, people know me from a standpoint that I'm an activist, and they know me from that standpoint, and some chambers are afraid because they've gotten so politically tied in to because I'm a realist about this, and a lot of chambers have gotten so steered politically because they are being run, which chambers are not supposed to be run by politicians. And a lot of chambers have politicians sitting on their boards. So with that being said, I won't get any deeper in the mud than I am, because I never get in quicksand, but I won't put my stiletto any farther in that mud. But in any event, because of my focus is this bill. And so we do have, as far as Calumet City and that is concerned, Calumet City is not part of what we're doing, because you also understand the state representative that originated the bill is the mayor of Calumet City. So we are not, and even though Calumet City is a community that does need the funding, it still did the bill. The most important thing, one of the poorest communities in the Southland, which is Robbins, was not even included in that whole, so again, just because Harvey was included, it does not change. If we were only focused on Harvey being included, and maybe that was the intention, was that they included Harvey, and they know, that they figured that I wouldn't have anything to say because Harvey was included. As far as Illinois Black Wall Street and even Harvey Area Chamber is concerned, the board members of Harvey Area Chamber, they're people like myself. We have a PhD sitting on the board. Matter of fact, his father was born and raised in the South. We have, and actually they still have family in the South. Or so again, I go back to perspective, and or on the South side, and had the experience of the whole city component or migration component. So the focal is different. So we want to see this bill do what it was intended to do as a House resolution to become a bill.
And I thought that I saw when we were reading the bill on the air, I could have sworn that I saw Robbins among those communities, that those 10 communities.
That you saw who?
Robbins, the city of Robbins, in that bill.
Maybe you got the last one, but in the beginning, Robbins was not in there.
Mhm.
We actually spoke about Robbins in the amendment.
Mhm.
You probably saw Dalton.
Dalton was there, yes.
Yeah, Dalton was there.
Mhm.
But I'm sure Robbins was not in the first, because we actually talk about Robbins in the mending, and why wasn't Robbins one of the first 10? As far as a lot of, as far as the bill is concerned, our capital, which is Springfield, Illinois, is not 70% Black, but the east side of Springfield has suffered for decades. Matter of fact, when my mother moved to the east side of Springfield, we were it was only 3 Black families in a 6-block area on the east side of Springfield. The east side of Springfield is so impoverished at this point. It's been that way, and it's been going downhill and further. And again, you have an equity investor who's working with a church there, and they're buying up all the local foreclosures, and it's not a homeowners program. It is a rental program where it's subsidized housing in half of the east quadrant of Springfield in that area.
And so the demographics is a lot of it are white, are you saying?
No.
For now.
Oh, you talking about in Springfield?
Yes.
Okay, but that's where we get into the quadrants and the sub-quadrants. There was a race riot in Springfield as well. Actually, there was a race riot in Springfield way before the Tulsa riot or the 1919 riots in 1904, 1905. And the whole business sector, Black business sector of Springfield was burned. That's actually over in the area by what used to be is UIC now, but it used to be St. John's Hospital, and there used to be Robert Hay housing projects in that area as well. Okay, so then again, that was a race riot area there, and it's never been built back. And there are no Black business corridors on the east side of Springfield that are conducive to what Black Wall Street is trying to present, and that's the capital. That's where the NAACP was originated. So this bill, as it stands, does not even speak to that, and that's what's considered to be a sub-quadrant. Springfield gets funding for inequities. However, I question if that funding is put on the east side of Springfield.
What do you mean by a sub-quadrant? What does a sub-quadrant have to do with the bill?
A sub-quadrant a sub-quadrant in a community or a city. Black communities, they're Alton, Illinois. I'll use Alton as another one. Alton, Illinois is a community that is not a impoverished community when it comes statistically. It's not an impoverished community, which means that it's more working class people there than not. However, the quadrant of Alton that is impoverished, which is the Black portion of Alton, there's no Black business district there. And well, the mayor just changed hands this last year, but what I'm saying is these cities, these villages, these cities, and even counties, they benefit from having the subquadrants and the Black communities that are impoverished there. However, the money is not going to those subquadrants or those communities. They're going around. So you got and I use Kankakee as another one. Look at how built up one side of Kankakee is. You've got $500,000, $250,000 homes. You get on the other side of Kankakee in the historical Black district of Kankakee, and it's a desert almost. And the as far as business corridors are concerned, they're all vacant.
And how does it benefit them again to have a subquadrant, to have a business vacant business corridor? How does it help those that are in the non-subquadrant, the places where there are jobs and where people want to live?
Okay, so it again, I go back to it's not about it. It helps everybody because it lowers crime, and that means that the people that are disadvantaged and impoverished are not robbing, stealing. There are always going to be bad people. There are six-figure people that have robbed and stole from somebody. We see it in the news every day. People will do whatever. It could be a mental illness, any number of things, but predominantly in a community where there is need and where there are young people that are looking up to their working class parents who struggle to keep their homes and to provide a place or to keep a business over decades and generations in that same community, it's a negative impact. And it impacts everybody. When you help impoverished people, when you help the economic growth of a people, you help everybody. You help the crime rate. You help people live on a standard that they can be proud and that they can have some fortitude about where they come from, and they can stand up and be proud of where they come from and know that they can go back there and keep a generational wealth system going, as opposed to move to another community because the community that they were born and raised in has nothing to offer them but probably getting robbed from someone who's moved there over the time they've been in school, that doesn't have what they have. And that's, like I said, that's everywhere. That's not just the Black community, that's everywhere, but it's predominantly in Black communities because they're most disadvantaged.
So the purpose of keeping community disadvantaged is to hopefully push all the crime to that area so that the crime would not affect the other areas that are not disadvantaged. So because I'm just trying to pick your brain, you seem to know about how it is. What do you think?
That's not that right there is false.
Okay.
Because when people think like that, they're completely wrong. That's the reason why there's nothing to rob in your community necessarily. So you will go to the communities on the outside of that community. That's why they have better policing, and they have better alarm systems, and they have better security.
So so then if it's not that, then it's only because let's say the HB 1960 is sitting there and is not moving. And then if people had the will, if the politicians had the will to address those disadvantaged communities, then they would try to get that bill out of committee to use this as a solution to address that disadvantaged subquadrant. But since they're not, then there must be a reason why that they want it to remain like that? Is it just racism, pure and simple then?
Well, it is twofold. It's racism and to a standpoint, but it's also the fact that people sometimes do things that they're embarrassed to acknowledge or they don't want brought to light. And they don't necessarily know that they did it until it's too late. And that's one of the things that I think that has happened here. I, well, well, I'm going to retract that. And I'm going to say that in some situations, it's systemic racism, it's learned behavior. And at the end of the day, at the very, very end of the day, I think a lot of embarrassment when it comes down to how this bill was passed through the House and how it was the number of things that we addressed in it that didn't impact the communities that it was said to impact, along with the legacy of what it represents. Does that make sense?
In other words, you're saying that they don't want the bill to pass because they don't want to acknowledge that how they have treated Black Wall Street. They just want to sweep it under the rug.
No. What I'm saying is that they understand you cannot read House Resolution 1320 and not understand what this bill is about, okay? You cannot read the actual bill itself, and if you know the legacy of Black Wall Street, you know that this bill does not impact that legacy. To add insult to an injury that's been in our country, that's been hidden in our country for 100 years. You get what I'm saying? So then, and you know, we're gonna even go back 600 years. You get what I'm saying? That approximately that Black folk have been in the United or been acknowledged in the United States of America. And we're gonna talk about the fact that legacy, to take a bill like this and do what was done to it, there's an embarrassment that comes along with it, besides saying, wow, someone presented it to us. We thought it was awesome. We read the prefix on the bill, because if you read the prefix on the bill, the cover of the bill, it reads very nicely, which most bills do, until you go into the policy and until you go into the procurement and how they're procured, what the factors are for qualifying for the bill, number one, what are the areas first impacted by the bill and how the dollars will be distributed, what are the guidelines under which those dollars will be distributed. 26 people on a committee. And it breaks down a lot of things in that whole piece, where there's an education component that's even missing with the people who would be managing the money and the protocol thereof. So with that being said, we want the bill to speak to the fact that it's being driven for education and inclusion of the people, education of the people that are getting the dollars, and the absolute inclusion that speaks to rebuilding a community like the Black Wall Street legacy was designed.
Yeah, we did see that. It's just that we were surprised that there is that push to keep it from coming into fruition.
I think it's embarrassment over anything. That's just again, it goes back to not acknowledging Hiroshima and putting and making that as if it was just an act of mankind, if you would, or had to be done. And I'm doing that because I'm saying these things because people identify with things that have impacted them as a race or nationality, as opposed to the indirect impact of what's impacted other people. Does that make sense?
Kind of, but still it's, I don't understand it very well.
Well, maybe you may take more time and read it.
And then also,
Because-
also if you can, please send us the HR 1320, because I spent many hours trying to locate it and I couldn't. So if you could
It's
send us
attached
those.
to the email that you have. You have 1320 and 1960 attached to the email, and you also have the amendments. All three of those documents are attached.
Okay, so okay, I'll later when I have time, then I will get to that. And then okay, we'll include that in the description so that our listeners, when they access this interview, at least they understand better what we're trying to address. It's
Well, you can read when you go to actually I explained it in the petition. The petition clearly explains what's taking place, and it explains exactly where the bill is.
Mhm.
And that's the whole reason why we're wanting people to rally with the petition to bring the bill full circle with the program to support it.
Mhm. Yes, well, we'll try to include it in the description, because by the time we got it, it was like after 9, and we were busy with the show. We didn't have time to read it, read into it, but that's okay. We'll include it in the description so that our listeners could have the background.
Okay.
Also, you mentioned that you were very busy, meeting deadlines for grants and funding. Funding renewals, are these grants and funding renewals helping you in this important work that you're doing?
Well, it's always important to help with grants and funding when it comes down to implementing, when it comes to implementing things in a community, because those grants and that funding helps you build capacity as an organization and get the people hired with the expertise needed. We have a technical assist arm, and Illinois Black Wall Street is actually it's an umbrella arm that speaks to different areas as it pertains to small businesses. Everything when you mentioned the cannabis industry, we are focusing in on the cannabis industry and the whole component but we're working with organizations and businesses that are addressing that. Okay, so then we built an arm that is structured to aid and assist with local and statewide components. We're actually putting together a committee and requesting that there be a committee that actually just addresses the issues and the bills that are written, the laws that are written that impact Black communities, and the amendment of the procurement to better assist and move that money directly to those communities without there being change orders or anything. And if there are any change orders, those change orders include what happens in those particular communities that money has been earmarked.
So what you're saying is that you're trying to get funding to get the right people to help you in making sure that those amendments cover what is necessary to bring the monies to the people that need it, and also to implement and at least even get better lobbying as well.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, it's still been very helpful, even though we had all that the mix up with the emails and well, we couldn't get the information on time, but it's still very helpful with about all that you've been telling us. So, but if you don't mind, let's do a community assessment with you. WZRD Chicago, being a nonprofit radio station, must be responsible to the community we serve. WZRD is mandated to file quarterly issues with the FCC on non-entertainment community-focused programming. We like to assess the community for these quarterly issue topics with 3 questions. First, what is most important to you? And it could be, of course, your work, but what is most important to you that drives you?
Me as an entity or my work, my civic duty? What drives me as an entity is the shoulders I stand on in my family and in the Black culture and the history of Blacks in America in general. That's my drive. I was raised to understand that my education, my ability to understand process on the level that I process on my children, my cousins, and other people like myself, we are not where we are this day without the history of the people who were brought here in chains, our family members and ancestors who were brought here in chains and fought to get better. With each segment, we want to make it better for the next generation and the next generation to come. So that's my drive.
Mhm. To improve things for future generations. And okay.
Yeah.
Mhm. What problem must be addressed? Long-term problem must we address?
Well, the reason why we're having this conversation, racism and inequities, and it's not something that, racism can stop if the law has prevented it, just like everything else that's against the law is stop racism could stop. And so, I mean, you can't change people's minds, but you can change the way they do things. And the same way with the inequities, if more dollars were put where they belong, and when it comes down to impoverished and or economic struggling communities, communities go in and underwater all the time. But if you use the models that are in communities that have never been underwater and that are stabilized to keep our communities from going that route, that can be done as well.
Mhm. And finally, what problem must be addressed now?
Same issues. That's the problem, is that I just made a stand this year with the tollway, IDA. I will not do another disparity study. They all say the same. I've been doing disparity studies participating in disparity studies for the last 20 years of my life. And even looking back at the disparity studies in the 60s, very little has changed when it comes to the Black community. It's just the same disparities, but from a different perspective.
Mhm. And are the disparities getting worse?
Well, it's getting worse when you have the level of young people that are taking their lives and addicted to drugs, and the gun violence that's going on. All of that, those things are connected. If Xanax, being high on Xanax and other and different types of drugs is no different than doing straight crack cocaine or any type of opioid for that matter. We have to, if our kids are medicating, there's a reason why they're medicating. So these things, we have to correct these things. These things didn't exist when I was a teenager or a young adult. They existed, but not on this level. It was a rarity in it. Now it's a everyday thing that you wake up in the morning and you're going to see at least 2 to 5 Black lives that have been taken unnecessarily to overdose, drug abuse, or gun violence.
And what other events do you have planned that will help for your Illinois Black Wall Street program agenda?
Okay. Well, as far as we are broader than, 1960 is just one component. We are going to be offering some larger and different structured technical assistance that will help disadvantaged businesses that haven't usually been helped. Actually, we'll also be helping to do some of and I say grassroots or structural homeowner workshops and different things like that. We'll have representatives or organizations that will be putting on those. As a statewide organization itself, we want to basically explain how legislation impacts the community, how policy and procurement impacts the community. So we will have a lot on the statewide level. We'll be talking policy and procurement and legislation. On the local level, we will be talking technical assistance, how our focal is from the community, if you would, or what we call from the local municipal government to the state house, if you would, then to the White House.
So what you mean is that you're going to be having events that will cover these the grassroots and the technical assistance to help push these programs forward.
Yes.
Okay. Well, if you when you have them, let us know, and then we could do a PSA for you on WZRD to let our listeners join in and be part of your work.
Can I ask you a few questions? Because I haven't, this was actually, Mr. Morton here is the one that actually inboxed me about your radio station. So I'm wanting to know, how long have you guys been around, and what kind of impact have you had?
Absolutely. I've been a DJ for over a year on Wizard, and creating public service announcements and doing all these different things to help my community and citywide and even further, because the WZRD is like online, so it's worldwide. It's really something, and we've got. I know that people are listening all over the place, and we do all these social justice kind of news stories, and the news comes on once a week. I'm sorry, it comes on every day of the week. I think it airs up to 5 to 8 times per day.
9 times.
9 times, up to 9 times, and it's I think it's making a real social impact. I think that we're doing a lot of good. I think we're helping a lot of people, and it's all based on social justice issues and nonprofit organizations and interesting stories, and not only ones that affect Northeastern Illinois University, not only ones that affect directly impact Chicago, but we have some national stories that about social justice that we really we cover.
So how many times will this how many times will this circulate? This actual segment circulate?
Well, we might be rebroadcasting it in the future.
I had to get it. This also will be on YouTube. So with YouTube, it reaches a different audience, and then we share it on social media, and then that branches out to all these many Facebook pages and groups, some of which Chamber owns, some of which Wizard has, some of which are groups that we have joined and share on, and so it really does have a reach. I can't tell you the numbers. I don't know the actual numbers, but I do.
Planners are numbers people. No, I'm just joking.
I can tell you by the reactions, we get a lot of hearts and thumbs ups all over the place.
Okay, well, we're launching a couple of YouTubes, and as an urban planner, I think it's important to get these things out there and to package this and to, because I've given pieces and things like that to politicians and or published them, and the politicians took and did what they wanted to with them. Now I'm going to, people know where it came from and how the real impact and what it was really meant to do, and just hoping the blessings of it actually. Well, I feel that if enough people are aware and focused on reform, we'll get reform. We've gotten it in so many different ways, and we can't continue to puppeteer a process that's not helping us all.
Yes, and also, this phone won't stop.
This,
While he's doing that, I want to make
our-
one quick point. My
Sure.
name is Andrea, not Andrea.
Okay, sorry about that, Andrea. You need to tell me, otherwise I wouldn't know.
So Andrea, also, we'll have it on the YouTube, and we'll have it on the social media, and we'll tag you up on it so you can share to whoever you choose to share this interview with as well.
Yeah, because I was going to ask if I could have a copy. So, and then the YouTubes that we make in the future, that I'll make in the future, like I said, there are going to be a lot of informationals and a lot of technical assist workshops that we'll do for both the public and private sector, because I think it's important that we speak to both. So will that be something that's profitable? I mean, that's probable for us to possibly work on? Because, yeah.
Just send it over to us and we could share. Send it over to us and we could share, sure.
Okay. Yeah, you can pick and choose, because it's, it's real stuff. It's real stuff. And if you're not real about where the inequities piece is going, some of it you're not gonna, and we don't engage where people aren't necessarily real. And I want to put that out there. I mean, it's a lot of organizations, they inequity this, inequity that, and just because you have a program and have a Black representative come on and say a few words, you have not resolved inequities. You have not even started the process.
Exactly. And we will be, and this interview will be published on the WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM YouTube channel for you to share as well.
And just make sure you personally send me a copy to Black Wall Street, because that is our, we have blackwallstreet.org, and we are updating and upgrading our websites and stuff like that as we go. But we found it more important during COVID to keep people's water on and help people get food and stuff. So we're now just getting to the point to where we re-pushing this whole piece, and we appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate the opportunity, and thank you for reaching out, Mr. Morton. And is it Leong?
Yes, there will be a link.
I know it's a first name thing, but usually it's a Southern thing. We just call people Mr. and Miss, and it's something I've never let go. And people always say, "Well, why you call? I'm your age." Okay, where I come from, it's just saying I acknowledge and I respect you as a person. So if you hear me saying Mr. Bill or Mr. Morton or whatever, it's not just a corporate term. It's just something we do in acknowledgement.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And I really, really did enjoy this interview, learned a lot, and it was great having the conversation.
Awesome.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Andrea Paxton, co-founder of the Harvey Chamber of Commerce and co-founder of Illinois Black Wall Street. And thank you, Bill Morton, president of the Rogers Park Chamber of Commerce, for joining us on WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM today.
Awesome week.